Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Thoughtful Talents Show. I'm Jen Werner.
And I'm Chad Ahern.
Today, we're going to be talking about the CliftonStrengths talent of harmony. So this harmony talent has some great, amazing things about it. Chad, do you want to tell us what Gallup has to say about harmony?
Sure. So Gallup defines this talent theme as follows. People exceptionally talented in the harmony theme look for consensus. They don't enjoy conflict. Rather, they seek areas of agreement.
Yeah, awesome. So hold up a second, because I've coached quite a few people with harmony. It's not terribly high for me. It's my number 11. But what is it for you?
Sure. So it's my number 4. So it's
Okay.
actually within my top 5. And it has a very practical edge to it. So I'm excited to talk about today.
Yeah, so I'm going to put you on the spotlight a lot, because where I have it, it's blurred with some other themes.
Okay.
So I really want to hear what you have to say about it. But from what I've heard from other coaches, I get a different attitude that comes out of this when they find out that they have harmony number 1 or in their top 5.
Yeah. So I think well, first of all, let me ask, what's the perception, or what do often people tell you when they talk about harmony?
What I've heard is like they feel like it means I'm all like, oh, kumbaya, and I want everyone to like each other. And they're like, I don't think that. I'm not that way. That's not it for me.
Yeah, that's definitely, I've heard that same thing. And I think it's a real misperception around harmony. It is one of these words that gets thrown around a lot in sort of pop culture. And, you mentioned that sort of kumbaya feeling that, the hippie movements of, everybody's sort of like jiving with each other and everybody's okay. And there's, you also have the musical perspective of, everybody being in harmony and everybody coming together. And yes, there's some of that in this description, but I think the big difference is when you really look at this being a theme that is really about practical action and practical agreement and minimizing not so much emotion, but emotional turbulence. I think this is probably the best way I've found to describe it is, there are those people that like to rock the boat for the sake of rocking the boat. Mm-hmm. And then there are others, like with harmony, that are just like, why are you rocking the boat? What purpose does that serve? So I think that's a real clear delineation between sort of that kumbaya feel and what Gallup is really trying to get at with defining and labeling this talent theme with harmony.
Yeah, I was trying to separate the two, like from what I know of harmony as a talent or a group of talents, as opposed to harmony that I know from the dictionary. So I went back to the dictionary and I pulled up Webster's definition. So one, they have as a combination of simultaneous musical notes in a chord, or
there's the music.
Yep, the structure of music with respect to the composition and progression of chords. Or 2, a pleasing agreement of parts, agreement or internal calm tranquility. And I was like, oh, okay, so this really does talk to harmony as a strength too, because I'm hearing like that, consensus, and you talked about it, the practical consensus of an app, like for an application, as opposed to that like kumbaya type of like you want all of everyone to agree. It's not necessarily that, right? And then I also really liked that that pleasing arrangement of parts, because I was like, oh, well, that really speaks to that consensus that we're talking about in harmony.
Yeah, it definitely, I put a lot more emphasis on the consensus and moving forward piece, at least for me. And again, like we've talked about in other episodes, harmony is definitely colored by or seasoned by some of my other themes. So I have a number of executing, like responsibility, that definitely put me in an action mindset. But I think maybe me sharing some sort of personal applications or how this has shown up for me personally might help highlight this difference. So we've
Yeah,
talked
I'd
about sort of that.
love to hear that.
Yeah. So we've talked about sort of the kumbaya, and that's not really how at least my harmony shows up. And I'm sure there are other listeners and people that have harmony that might have a different perspective, but I think there are three big pieces that I would highlight. And we've already started to talk about one of them, which is with my harmony, I don't like to see people sort of fuss for fussing's sake. So constructive conflict is very engaging and very energizing for me. That for me, that ties into my learner and being able to ask questions and understanding others. But for people to just sort of pick a fight to pick a fight, whether it's in a meeting or a personal relationship, that for me serves no purpose. And I'm like, what are you doing? Why is this a thing? So I think that that's one big piece, that if it's constructive and it's moving us forward, great. If it's not, then why are you, again, rocking the boat? The second piece, which we've also already started talking about, is that really practical action. Problems are solved and addressed through thinking about the practical action. I think where at least my harmony gets sort of agitated is when people bring up past slights or past fights, and we're rehashing old ground over and over again. Again, whether you're just picking a fight to pick a fight, or whether you're bringing up old material in a new context, doesn't do us much good. If there's not much we can do about yesterday, there's a lot we can do about today and tomorrow.
Right. And
so I think that the harmony talent theme really kind of pushes me to look at, okay, what is practical going forward? And I think the other piece that is really important is, I think you talked about it in the Webster definition of sort of that emotional consensus or emotional tranquility, I think was the word in the
internal calm, tranquility. Yes. Right.
So I think that is actually a place where there's a disconnect between the Gallup definition and the Webster's definition, because those of us with harmony can often be perceived as, oh, well, we don't have any emotional, waves of our own. I think the difference is that we may not externally look like we have a lot of variation. We are kind of even keeled, but that doesn't mean that the emotions aren't stirred up at times internally. I found for myself, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, about sort of the benefit and how this can impact teams and so forth. But there have been times in my own life where I'll be really calm in a meeting, even though on the inside, I'm just like, what in the world is going on? Why is this a thing? And I'll, especially as frustration, I can at least keep things kind of under wraps, but then we'll blow up when I am alone, or within a very small circle of trusted people that I know that if I show those emotions, it's not going to blow up my relationships with them. So I think that that's a place where there is some difference between Gallup and Webster. We talked a little bit about the seasoning of talents, and there are a couple that really kind of come to mind for me. So my harmony and deliberative, again, that drives sort of that reserved cautiousness, even keeled. It can lead me to not share exactly how I'm feeling, particularly in a professional setting. But that doesn't take away from the emotions. I still have emotions as a human being. It's just that the deliberative is thinking about the risk of showing those emotions outwardly. I think, my harmony and responsibility really kind of come to the practical application. We already talked a little bit about that. And then the other one that I love to highlight for people is my harmony and analytical get together. Think about the practical application of sniffing out kind of the BS. So I know in the pre-show, you and I talked a lot about some of the projects I've worked on, say, looking at certain database systems and being sold to, or even learning opportunities that we get as coaches. And, there are coaches out there, this masterclass or that masterclass. And that harmony and analytical really kind of blow through all the emotional triggers that a lot of sales approaches try to stir up, and be like, okay, what's really at the heart of this? And that's a place where the two can really kind of come together and have played out in my life in a really sort of beneficial way.
It's really cool to hear that, because I hadn't ever thought of harmony as having that ability to do that, but using that with analytical, I could see that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's really cool. The other thing I found really interesting is what you were saying is when we were talking about deliberative, we talked a little bit about like not being devil's advocate, but sometimes, right? Like using our deliberative talents to pull out, what might happen if if we went down this route or whatever. But what you're saying your harmony dislikes is actually the throwing out ideas and options, or stirring up trouble just for trouble's sake. Is that what is, did I hear that right?
Yeah. It's especially if you take the sort of the opposite side. My learner and harmony really get together and love to explore different perspectives, as long as those perspectives are coming from a place of good intention, and that we're going to work together to figure out what is the best balance of the best ideas.
Sure.
But if, as you just said, if you're just throwing ideas or devil's advocate things into the mix to be troublemaker,
Right.
or to kind of throw mud on things, that doesn't get us anywhere.
Sure.
It's probably why, having just experienced election day, why the whole mudslicking of our political environment really does not have much appeal to me, because that's stirring trouble for trouble's sake to a certain extent. Yes, there's some possible, progress and ideas being put on the table, but when people start just mudslinging, that for me, and probably for a lot of other people with harmony, just does not resonate at all.
It's the conflict for conflict's sake.
Yeah. So
And
we could keep going around and around on that.
We are conflict avoidance with this a bit, I think. Yeah. So it was interesting to hear you with such high harmony. Mine tends to get lost. Being at 11, it's flanked by some other relationship themes for me. So I have empathy at 10 and developer at 12. So empathy, harmony, developer, like the bundling of those three relationship building themes, I think help to make me approachable, easy to talk to, and easy for others to open up to me, and then for me to be open to others' ideas and opinions. I think that's the way that harmony shows up for me the most. But I will say I struggle with so I also have adaptability at 6.
Okay.
So that rounds out the rest of my, like relationship building themes, within my top 12, I guess. The harmony and adaptability, I blur them quite often. Like, am I yielding to another's point of view based on my harmony and wanting to avoid the conflict of that? Or am I bending out of the willingness to change my needs and to bend to another's request, being adaptable and going with the flow. So that's where having those in my supporting themes definitely shows the difference between me with my harmony at 11 and you with your harmony at 4.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up relationship building themes, because harmony is the only one of my top 5 that falls in the relationship building theme. But one of the other themes that plays into my relationship building is actually my learner, which I've already talked about, and learning about other people. And so, I've already talked about that combination. So it's really interesting to hear your harmony and adaptability pairing together and influencing you in a certain way around maintaining and building relationships. Right.
Yep. So tell me a little bit about how you feel your harmony has been a benefit to your life and your work.
Yeah. So I think, that focus on practical solutions has really been sort of front and center. The more I've gotten to know and understand my own harmony talents, I think it was one that at first I was a little, like, what exactly do I do with this? It's great to build consensus, but how does that actually impact? And the more I've really looked at it, I've really noticed that the practical application, I tend to like to find, okay, what is the actual action steps here? And again, that's probably tinted by my responsibility and wanting to know what to do, what needs to get done, etc. But that it differs from, say, sort of the themes like intellection or strategic, which are very big picture. And I think harmony, even though it's in the relationship building domain, has a very present tense or near tense look or field of view, at least how I've lived it out.
Okay.
So I think that that practical solution is one. I've already talked about the BS detector. My learner would love to go and explore every master class and coaching course and all the rest, but there are a lot of them that you initially get engaged with because of the emotional triggers. And one of the ways I've actually used my harmony is, okay, let's sort of strip away all the emotional triggers that this person's trying to put in their literature, and what do I actually get out of this program, or what's the practical takeaways that I'll get. So it's that BS sort of detector. I hate using BS, but there's some stuff out there that's real garbage that's prettied up really nicely, and people get attracted to because the emotional pulls of the sales messaging.
Right. The marketing did their job in that case.
Right. And I respect the fact that marketing does a great job, and I could probably do a little bit better there, but my harmony also keeps me away from that realm because I don't want to come across that way. It diminishes the manipulation for me.
Yeah, good.
And
that's a great way to say it.
Yeah.
Harmony diminishes the manipulation. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's that. And then the other piece that I always bring up when I'm coaching people is, given my analytical and some of my learner mixed in, my harmony loves balancing. And this is another part that's in the longer definition of harmony, is that there is a balance connotation to the theme. And so for me, that has always meant balancing the research that Gallup has done around strengths-based development and the CliftonStrengths and employee engagement, alongside the balance. The other side of that is the person's lived experience. So when I get into a coaching conversation, it's a lot more about learning about the person, but at times it helps to be able to bring in or balance their perspective against the larger research and data set that Gallup and other research organizations have been able to put together. And so that's another place where it's really helped me in my professional life, particularly as a coach. So
that's great to hear. That balance is just really interesting to think about it from that standpoint, because I don't think I had ever thought of that before. But there is quite a bit of that happens with us coaches. We know, but it shows up so differently, with that blending of our talents, depending on our mixes, it really does start to shape and adjust some of these. And that's why they call them like groups of talents, right? Because it's not just one talent harmony, it's a bunch of different things that's encompassed by that one word, harmony. So
I know you have as 11, but I am kind of curious, like, have you seen any positives that harmony has brought to your combination? I mean, I know you said you've got it flanked by a bunch of other themes, but think about harmony on its own. What's been the positive impact on your life?
I don't know if I can strip it away from what it is, whether that's like adaptability that I'm seeing or if it's harmony. Although it is one of those ones I count as in my, like top strengths as opposed to the supporting ones. Yes, the dominant ones. But I think it's in that ability to just really be open for others' opinions, to gather. And I almost think of it as like an input type like thing for me. I'm gathering the information from all the different sources and all the different people in order to help me like figure out, what's the right move forward, what's going to be the consensus, I guess is the word of the day. To how, how this is going to really work with everyone. And maybe it won't make everybody happy, but we're getting as much as we can.
Yeah.
out of it. So yeah, I'd
Awesome.
say that's probably the benefit I see for me.
Awesome.
Do you want to talk about those, like the double-edged sword, where this might negatively affect your life?
Yeah. So it definitely has a darker side to it, especially if you're not thinking about it.
Sure.
We as coaches, often refer to this sort of the raw application, or, just
Mhm.
not being thoughtful about it. Um, I think one place where I can occasionally, especially if I'm in not a great place, but I can start to diminish other people's emotional wavelengths, and really, like, again, just like with the sales messaging, sort of strip away the emotion and be like, okay, well, what's the
Yeah.
issue? What's actually going on, and what can we actually solve? Sometimes it can be really hard for a harmony to solve something that is very
Mhm.
emotional. You don't solve emotions, and so that can be a very tricky balance, to manage with
Sure.
harmony. So
I will say I've been on the receiving end of this with you. So you and I've been through lots of different things in our coaching careers, and we've had lots of conversations and working just together, and some,
yeah,
internal coaching that we've shared just together. And I've been on the receiving end of this, and it's actually really comforting to have you. I know you see it as like it can't always, or it isn't always a great thing to strip away the emotion, but it does
yeah,
bring you to the source of what's going on, to be able to pull that emotion out of it and just be like, okay, let's look at the facts. What is going on? Can we pull ourselves out of the emotion for a moment so we
yeah,
can see what's happening and then find a way to move forward? And I think you do it beautifully, at least from a coachee perspective.
yeah.
It's really, really helpful.
So I would agree that I can do it effectively. And again, we're talking about a double-edged sword, right? It only takes a
Yeah.
little bit to go from, a really great application like that to, sometimes I actually have to put thought into, oh, somebody has had something happen in their lives,
Mhm.
and consciously going into that conversation, be like, hey, recognize their likely emotional space, or ask them about it. Sometimes is um, a conscious effort, because with harmony, it's very easy to kind of blow right by it,
Sure.
because you just want to get to the practical. So I think that that's what I started getting at, is
Yeah.
almost ignoring or blowing right past. You might address it for 10 seconds and then move on, and that's really not where that
Right.
person's at. They need to emotionally unpack first, and then they're
Yeah.
ready for, either a conversation or a coaching session or whatever. So
That's
that's
great.
one. um I think, my other point kind of goes to what you were talking about with adaptability and harmony, which is sometimes I'll often concede to others when I really should stand my ground,
Mhm.
because of that, point in the short definition: looking for consensus, don't enjoy conflict, and would prefer to seek areas of agreement. If it's, you know make an agreement to avoid having an all-out, verbal duel with somebody, I'd much prefer to be, okay, great, whatever, let's just move on.
Yep.
And that's not always the best approach. So I think that
Right.
that can have a negative side effect um, on it. It looked like you were about to say something, so I don't want
Because
to jump to my next point
that's
before.
the way I see it, negatively impacting my life. I will say I probably avoid conflict like the plague. Like, I would rather move on to something or someone else than actually face and attack the issue that's causing the conflict. So, we joked a little bit about the, like, I'm gonna grab my ball and I'm gonna take it home, because then you can't play if I take my ball. And I'm like, but I'm also giving up the field in that case, right?
Right.
Like, we talked about that. Like, yeah, I'm actually, maybe I should have stood my ground and stayed there and, made them leave my field, as opposed to,
Right.
taking my ball and retreating. So I thought that was a really good image around, kind of the differences with this, and how that double-edged sword works
Yeah.
with harmony.
Yeah. It's
Did you have more to add with those?
I was just thinking about, you know we've talked a little bit about professional. One of the places where I've really seen it negatively impact sort of my family life is actually not allowing my boys. So I have two young boys under the age of 15. And, they're growing up and learning how to try and, work together and be brothers and be in society and so forth. And one of the things I've noticed lately is my tendency to jump into their conflicts and be like, all right, let's just knock it off and figure out what's next. And so it's not so much a negative impact on me, it's, am I having a negative impact on their ability to understand how to have constructive conflict? And so I just point that out for anybody that's listening that might be, bringing up their own children or have their own family relations that they're thinking about. That tendency to want to jump in and just not have the conflict happen, I'm not sure is in the best service of my sons. And so I've been trying to work on letting conflicts go a little longer with them, listening from afar, but see if they can't come to some agreement. And if things start to get, messy, or, somebody's getting hurt or somebody's getting punished, of course, step in and separate that. But sometimes I wonder about, the consequences of stepping in too early. And
that's
so
great, Chad, because I think about all of the conflict resolution issues there are now, like how few people can actually have a conflict and resolve it respectfully. We were just talking about the election, and that's another one of those, like you can see it, it's right in your face during this time of the year for sure. So I think that's we could do a whole show on that.
And I also don't, I want to say, front and center that this is not a political show. I'm not getting in on who voted which way or anything. And I don't want to focus it all on the recent political environment, but it is sort of front and center as we're taping this, 3 days after, and we'll publish it a couple days after now. But in terms of just thinking about family relationships, and particularly, people that are still learning how to have conflict. So whether they're as young as my boys or, even high school kids, still figuring out how to have adult, level proper conflict with each other and be able to constructively come out of that. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing a disservice. And I don't know if that's a concern shared by my fellow Harmony talented individuals, but it's something that I thought I'd at least want to highlight during this show.
I think it's a great thing to bring up. Yeah. Did you have any other ones you wanted to add before we go into what this looks like for others?
No, and those were my main points about sort of negative impact. I am kind of curious, given that I've seemed to have talked a lot and it is kind of high for me. I am kind of curious about how you have seen this show up in other people you've coached. I've talked a lot about my perspective. I'm curious. We've heard a little bit about yours, but what about the people you've coached?
Yeah, I've had quite a few managers who had this in their top 5. Some that it was at number 1, and others where it was just within the top 5. And I will say that they were all of the managers that I coached that had this in their top 5. They were all almost embarrassed by it. And it was that initial reaction to the word harmony and what they thought it meant, that perception that we talked about right at the beginning of the show.
Kumbaya.
Like, I am not kumbaya. The other things I heard was like, I worry that it makes me seem weak or like I don't have opinions of my own because I'm asking for everyone to share their opinion, or I'm looking at all of the options that are out there, listening to everyone and their say. And what I thought about that was that it made them fantastic leaders. They actually listened to their people. We're looking for the best way forward for the team, not specific to how it was going to help one person or how it was going to individually affect them. They were, and it goes back to that inner struggle I think you talked a little bit about too. Like internally, they're like battling with this, but externally, their team was just like, do you not have an opinion of your own? Just make the decision. You're the leader. You're our manager. You have to just tell us what to do. I thought it was a wonderful talent for them to have. The other thing they said to me was that they thought that finding consensus was important, but they also like to hear all the ideas before they decided. So
Yeah.
it was not just some of the team. They really needed all of the team's, information. So after they learned about it, after they saw it in action, it really started to bloom and become something wonderful, where they were sharing openly with how they manage their harmony talents and what it looks like to really take in everything from everyone. Because
Yeah.
for people who don't have harmony high, or maybe even like balancing a little bit on includer, right? Like includer wants to have everybody involved, and harmony wants to hear all the voices, wants to hear all hear everything that's being said. And I think those two kind of would go hand in hand. But I loved seeing them and their teams be stronger because they were using their harmony talents to really impact their team.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about it in that way, because when you're describing that, it reminds me of the conversation going on about, do introverts versus extroverts make better leaders? I think this is almost, again, you can have an extroverted person with harmony talents, you can have an introverted person with, themes like command or self-assurance or significance, that are all sort of, or woo, they're all very sort of front and center influencing. So I'm not putting those in opposition to each other, but it is that, harmony beings a little bit more introverted want to find the consensus, want to take in everything. You mentioned includer, getting everybody's opinions, not just a couple people. I think that's really interesting piece. And definitely the internal and external, that emotional turbulence, it doesn't go away for us. It's just we try and keep it out of the public realm. And it was interesting hearing you talk about that, because it can sometimes, and we're going to get to how this can positively or negatively impact a team, but it can sometimes leave that team feeling a little behind or not aware of how the process is being sorted out. So that was fantastic.
Thinking back about those leaders that I coached, they were very even keel. Like now, like seeing it through your eyes and hearing you explain how it shows up for you, I can see that in them as well. Seeing them be pulling the emotion out of the situation, getting to the practical, like how do we move forward, is very true of them. So I do feel like that strikes a real chord for me too, even just in those I've coached.
Yeah.
Have you seen it differently in anyone you've coached?
Yeah, so I'm going to just highlight a couple sort of talent combinations, just to sort of highlight some different ways that harmony can be maybe impacted, or again, we've talked a little bit about our combinations and how it influences how our harmony talents come out. But I think there are a couple that come to mind. I've recently been coaching somebody with harmony and discipline, and they have a really sort of even-handed approach to applying standard operating procedures. So, is the process fair? Is the process regardless of kind of what your situation is or whether you love it or not. Again, it's that practical application of a standard process. So I think, another one has been empathy and harmony. And it's really interesting to see that balance, because they both sense emotion from others really, really strongly. Like it's like that radio tower, they receive all the emotional wavelength. So they can be much more knowledgeable about the emotions of their team members, but then their harmony seems to come through and kind of go, okay, well, now that I know what the emotional wavelength is, I can kind of not push it aside, but just sort of recognize it, put it to the side, and then really kind of dig deeper at, again, what's the practical, how do we get through the emotion? How do we think about what the emotional impact is going to be once we make a decision? So it can have a sort of an outbound application to it too. Another combination that I've seen in somebody I coached was harmony and election. And they need a ton of time, that intellectual stream of consciousness processing, but there's usually a thread that runs through their thought process about how are we getting to a practical solution at the end of this. And intellection sometimes doesn't have that practical application because it is just, let's explore and think about the world or think about what's going on around us for the sake of thinking. I think the interesting blend is having harmony sort of, tied in there, is that then there is a practical application to the thought process. And then we've already talked a little bit about it because of your own harmony and adaptability, that giving in tendency. I'd forgotten that was part of your combination when I originally put together my notes. But that's, wanting to keep the peace, so they just agree to everything. And that, that's got its pros and cons as well.
Absolutely.
I think one other behavior that I have noticed that doesn't really tie to another theme is that harmony can lead to a lot of self-deprecating behaviors. Let's put myself to the side so that I'm thinking about others. Others might know more, can do more, so I'm going to take the back seat, is how I heard somebody recently that I coached, who had harmony in her top 5, sort of, it's probably not the best demonstration. And she was just getting started with strengths awareness. But she commented a lot about, she would kind of downplay herself because others in the room were more experienced or knew more or had been at the job longer. And so I think that that's something to be cautious about, especially if other coaches are listening to this. How are those harmony talents being demonstrated to others? And are they the most effective? Are they showing up most effectively in their behaviors? So I'd just mention that for people to think about and be aware of. If you've got somebody that's kind of down on themselves or will, take pokes at themselves to up other people, could that be a harmony talent coming through and not the best way?
Sure.
So
interesting.
Yeah. I know that was a little heavy at the end there,
that
but
one is heavy because
it was a very interesting demonstration. It was the first time I'd heard it that way. And, I have it, and here I am coaching with somebody with it, and hearing a very different tone to it was informative, but also something that I think that person is going to keep working on.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to that, like, seeming, from what I've heard from my people I had coached with harmony, having this like perception that they're weak, that they don't have an opinion of their own. So it kind of takes that and goes a bit step deeper and a little darker and sadder, actually. So if we can encourage those with harmony to be able to share some of what's going on, that internal dialogue that's happening as they're going through some of the issues. We can talk about how that those contributions to the team and each other. But before we do that, do you have any images that really come to mind when you think about this theme?
Yeah, I mean, we've already used the phrase probably 3 or 4 times already, but it's the keel of a sailboat. It really is, that force that you don't see under the water, but that, if you've spent any time around a lake, like I live, 3 miles from Lake Champlain, we've got tons of marinas, and you see all the sailboats, jacked up, during the winter, and you can see the keel. But when they're on the water, when they're in operation, that keel is a hidden component of the boat, but it is critical. And it keeps the wind turbulence and the water turbulence from completely capsizing the boat. I think that that's one of the places where harmony can have both for the individual as well as for the team. And we're going to get to the team conversation here in a second, but that huge force of having something to anchor on, or to at the bottom of the boat that moves with you. So it's not necessarily an anchor, but it keeps the boat upright. So that calmness. One of the other things is, almost reversing the analogy, is sort of that duck on the water, very calm on top, pounding like crazy or dealing with the emotional wavelength underneath on their own.
That's a great one too.
So, I mean, you could think about it flipping the water imagery, because there is that sort of, as we said before, those with harmony are not non-emotional, and we're not Spock, we're not, Romulan from the Star Trek universe. We still have emotions. It's just a matter of how we maintain them and that even keeledness. So I'm starting to mix metaphors here, but
yeah, you're
just
good.
but yeah, just that calmness that can come with it, and whether you show it or not.
Yeah, that's great.
So
yeah, I didn't really have one. I was back to my ball and field analogy, and I'm still not sure if I know where that fits it, and whether, I'm staying with my ball and holding my field, or if I'm giving it up.
Well, I know in the pre-show we talked a little bit more about that analogy, and I think it's do you try and build consensus around a team and what you're doing on the field, and if you can't build a consensus, does that lead you to make the decision? Because either one is a conscious decision. You can either stay on the field and play by yourself. You can pick up your ball and leave, which then you're conceding the ground to everybody else's opinions. You're not even part of the discussion anymore. Or do you try and build consensus within the team so that you're moving the ball down the field? And that's that practical application piece. So not to take,
Love it.
not to tell you what your metaphor is, but I know that that's something that you made a lot more clear in our pre-show, and I think it's worth considering.
I think you put it perfectly, because it is one of those where I hadn't thought of grabbing my ball and going home, as I've just given the field. I've completely conceded my position, and I'm just going to take the back seat and let everybody else make the decision whether or not that's a good one or the right one. So I think it's a great place to think about, are you trying to do both? Stay on the field with the ball and moving it forward, finding that consensus, or if we're really just like giving in and not really even seeing ourselves, back to your other, combination of strengths, like if we're not seeing ourselves as value and what we have to bring to the table. So it'd be really dangerous. Okay. Are we going to talk about team next?
Sure. So I'm gonna start with you. Given that you've coached a few leaders with this, I'm kind of curious about what you see as the team's best contribution to a team, because I know I've got my own thoughts, but I'm curious about yours.
Sure. They're probably going to be similar to yours, I'm guessing, but I think they are great mediators. People with harmony can be great mediators. Being able to really look for, and again, it's that like finding all of the information and then pulling out what's best for everyone. So as a team leader, I could see that, like they're great mediators, but even individually, although there's some conflict avoidance that may happen there, they may be looking, like you were saying, like with you and your boys, jumping in the middle of an argument and trying to like calm the water. So like keeping everyone calm and moving forward. I also think their benefit to the team is they are even tempered then too. So friendly, so people with harmony tend to be friendly and even tempered. So I could say those would be the things I see as benefits.
I would definitely agree with all of those. The only, I think my additions would be that those, particularly if they're team members, sort of the individual contributor level, and I know even team leaders are individual contributors, but if you're not leading the team, I think that those with harmony can really help people refocus on the future, instead of, again, looking at past slights or the emotional baggage of whatever happened before. They can say, okay, look, where are we at? Again, we can't do much about yesterday or last year, but we can do something about today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. So I think that there's a real sort of refocusing on the future that somebody with harmony can bring.
Or maybe even refocusing on the now. Like,
Oh, very much so.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And that was sort of my point, is, either now, today, tomorrow,
Yeah, not
future. So
trying to fix the past.
yeah,
Good.
I think from a team leader perspective, um, they can sift through that emotional wavelength and might be influencing others. Sorry, if they have people on their team that might be trying to emotionally pull people in one direction, the team leader with those harmony talents can be like, okay, well, that's your opinion, or that's where you think we should go, but we really haven't gathered the consensus of the team. And so that ability to kind of pull back from immediately just following the coolest, newest idea that has a lot of emotional energy that might go with it, excitement. You can get excited about something that leads you in a very, very much the wrong direction. And I think one of the wonderful things about those with harmony is they can dissipate, maybe not ignore, but dissipate the emotional draw of that, and then actually look at the practical, and then help lead the team in that new practical direction. Might not be,
like
as
you said, sniffing out that BS.
Right. I was also going to say that there's the cool, emotionally energized, shiny, cool new thing to go in that direction. It may not be super kind of sexy or super attractive, but from a practical standpoint, it may need to be this other direction that might not be as cool or as neat looking, but it's much more of where the team needs to go. And so I think a team leader with harmony can really kind of help manage that transition of, okay, we need to shift our energy over here. I do know from my own living out and learning that harmony can also have a negative impact on a team. And so I'm going to, again, put the ball back in your court about what you've seen or what you think harmony's negative impact on a team is, either from an individual contributor or from a team leader perspective.
I think the biggest one is that, like, internal processing that's happening. So being that, a team leader may be internally processing all of the emotion from the team, all of the conversations, all of the, input that's coming forward. They're doing that themselves. So they've pulled that all in. You might see them actually ask everyone's opinion, and they pull that all in, and then nothing happens. Right. So they're processing it. They're spending the time going through this. They're finding the consensus. They're working through the right way forward. And to the team, that can look a little scary. Like, what's going to happen? Which direction are we going? So it can start to feel a little unstable. Or unstable. You're feeling some of that instability in the team, where they're like, there were a lot of ideas given. If they weren't part of that conversation with everyone sharing ideas at the table, let's say this is happening one-on-one. I shared my ideas with you, team leader, and now I haven't heard anything. I could be thinking you're going with my idea, and then Sally's over here, oh, she's going with my idea. So in that realm, you could get the team all feeling like they're going in lots of different directions without sharing some of that, what's going on. So I think transparency, or maybe lack of transparency, possibly during that processing time, can lead to some feelings of instability in the team, and just confusion, right? But what's happening.
And just to clarify, what I'm hearing you say is it's that internal processing, trying to find the consensus. It's not necessarily processing the emotional wavelength of each person, or the validity of each idea. It's that processing of consensus that sometimes doesn't get voiced out. Oh, I'm taking your part because this is going to work with her part versus alongside this piece from this person, and sort of putting together the puzzle with the different pieces from the different people, but not telling people how that puzzle's come together. That's what I heard you said. I know that we talked a little bit more about that in our pre-show, but I just want to make sure that was clear to our listeners, that it's not so much the processing the emotional wavelength, it's the building the consensus and building the shared product.
Correct. Yeah.
It's interesting because as you were talking about it, I was also thinking about the emotional side of it and
Mhm.
the negative impact of having harmony. And, I talked about sort of peeling away the emotional um, component of discussions or conversations or disagreements.
Yeah.
I think one of the real disservices if somebody is leaning too heavily on their harmony, especially as a team leader, they could actually dismiss that whole component. People are going to have feelings about direction A versus direction B or even direction C,
Yep.
and not addressing those or not giving room for those emotions to come to the surface within the team, I think is a disservice and can negatively impact the behavior of the team, because it goes to one of the four needs of followers that Gallup has identified around compassion and showing a recognition of other people's emotional stance and where they're coming from. So I think that was, it pairs into what you were just saying, but I think is a slightly different component that some leaders with harmony could be very dismissive of the emotions of others.
In order to find that consensus.
Yeah. And then just since we're on the team leader, I'm also going to bring up, and we've kind of already highlighted this, and you talked about it beautifully when we're talking about other people we've coached, but those with harmony in a team leader position could very easily acquiesce to those with stronger personalities on the team. We've talked a little, we hinted a little bit about people with command or significance, or, very strong strategic, that, they know the path forward. This is, I've already done the thinking. You don't need to worry about it, Mr. Harmony or Mrs. Harmony. We're just going to make a decision. And somebody in a team leader role with harmony may very well just be like, well, I don't want to fuss or fight with that person, so we're just going to kind of go with what they're saying. And I think that may not always be in the best service of the team. And so there's a negative impact there.
Danger there.
Yeah. Were there any things that you want to share in terms of a team member? I forget if we kind of covered team member role for you.
Kind of the same thing with that acquiesce to others. They may take the back seat and not voice their own opinions, or like put that out there. Well, we already have so many other options or so many other ideas from everyone else. Maybe it's better if I just keep this to myself. So I do worry that might be something that happens if they feel like they shouldn't bring their opinion to the table.
Yeah. So I think, just as sort of, bringing it back to the positive side, I think, team leaders that have harmony, that may also have other people on their team with harmony. I think what you're bringing up is sort of that balance is, those with harmony, and you're applying it well, making sure that you're drawing out all opinions, even if somebody with in sort of an individual contributor role has harmony and they're thinking, well, I don't want to voice up because that person's idea is better than mine, or that person, it's obvious everybody's energized around that. A team leader with harmony talents should be drawing those other quieter opinions out onto the table. I think that can be going to the positive side of best contribution to a team is, almost like you were talking about with include everybody, draw out all the opinions and all the pieces. So
yeah, it's great.
So Jen,
last
I was gonna just ask you the same thing. No, I think, when it comes to leading and coaching those with harmony is, the focus on the practical and the consensus, like we talked about at the very beginning. Know that that's where they're going to be sort of happiest and might be able to contribute the most is when everything is not all riled up.
Right.
Having calm, stable places to operate from allow them to already be sort of past the having to sift through the emotional wavelengths of everybody and just look at what can be done. I think is a big piece for team leaders listening to this, that as they think about leading and developing their people.
And it's such a wonderful talent to have. Like, think of all of the relationships that they're building, the team camaraderie. It may not be a popular opinion with everyone. And it probably won't be, because we all have, we all come with our own baggage and our own stuff. But being able to find a way forward that's the best for collectively everyone together is just such a wonderful, thing to have, an ability that I think Harmony needs to see this in that light, as opposed to that like kumbaya type of moment. It's not about everybody being happy, but it's about moving the things forward and keeping the team together.
Yeah. Excellent final point. So I think we're going to finish. I'm going to do what a lot of other podcasters often encourage people to do. Please subscribe to our channel. Please keep coming back for future episodes. We also really invite other people's opinions and comments. So feel free to leave us questions or concerns or things you think we missed in the comments. And as always, we can always use reviews. We're just starting out. So getting a couple of reviews about how we're doing would be awesome, especially those of us with analytical that want the data about, how can we be most helpful? So
absolutely.
So anyway.
And that's a good place to let everybody know we're going to be off for a couple of weeks for the Thanksgiving break, but then back right at the beginning of December for our next episode, I believe on Activator.
So. Oh, you're gonna have to lead that one, Jen.
Watch out.
Awesome. Well, until next time, I'm Chad.
And I'm Jen.
And we'll see you next time.